Assessing whether a person should agree to risks or potential harms requires more than listing dangers or calculating probabilities. It requires understanding how the agent forms their judgment, why they are inclined to accept the risk, and how an evaluator should interpret that judgment. The distinction between normative reasons, the facts that genuinely count for or against taking the risk, and motivating reasons, the psychological considerations that actually move the agent, is central to this assessment. Without this distinction, we cannot determine whether the agent's decision reflects rational agency, compromised consent, or a morally significant failure of judgment. This framework clarifies how motivating reasons shape the quality of judgment, how appraisers evaluate that judgment, and how questions of right and wrong action become interwoven with the acceptance or imposition of risk. It provides a structured way to understand not only what the agent decides, but what that decision expresses about their reasoning, responsibility, and moral standing. Motivating reasons and the evaluation of judgment. A clear, self-contained explanation. 1. The basic distinction. Philosophers draw a sharp line between two kinds of reasons. Normative, justifying, reasons. Facts that count in favor of an action or belief, motivating, explanatory, reasons. The psychological states that actually move an agent to act or judge. This distinction matters because a person can have excellent normative reasons while acting on poor motivating ones, or vice versa. 2. Why motivating reasons matter for evaluating judgment. When we evaluate a person's judgment, we are not only asking whether they had good reasons available, we are also asking whether their actual basis for judgment reflects, proper sensitivity to the relevant facts, appropriate weighting of considerations, and a rational connection between what they believed and why they believed it. Motivating reasons reveal the internal logic of the agent's judgment. They show what the agent took to justify the judgment, even if those considerations were mistaken or irrelevant. 3. The core insight. A judgment is evaluated not only by the quality of the normative reasons that existed in the world, but also by the quality of the motivating reasons that the agent responded to. This is because, motivating reasons show how the agent processed the situation. They reveal whether the agent's judgment was rational, negligent, biased, careless, or appropriate. They determine whether the agent's judgment reflects competent agency or a breakdown in reasoning. Thus, motivating reasons are indispensable for assessing the epistemic and moral quality of a judgment. 4. How motivating reasons affect evaluation. A. Rationality. A judgment is rational when the motivating reason is appropriately connected to the normative reason. If the motivating reason tracks the normative reason, the judgment is rational. If the motivating reason is irrelevant, distorted, or emotional in the wrong way, the judgment is irrational, even if the conclusion happens to be correct. B. Responsibility. We hold agents responsible for judgments when their motivating reasons reflect, avoidable ignorance, bias, wishful thinking, or failure to attend to obvious evidence. Motivating reasons reveal whether the agent exercised the right kind of epistemic care. See appraisal of character. Motivating reasons also show what values, dispositions, or priorities guided the judgment. A judgment based on prejudice reveals a vice, a judgment based on careful attention reveals a virtue. 5. Why normative reasons alone are not enough. Normative reasons exist independently of the agent's psychology. They tell us what the agent should have judged, but they do not tell us, why the agent actually judged as they did, whether the agent's reasoning was competent, or whether the agent's judgment expresses rational agency. To evaluate judgment, we need both, the normative landscape, what counted in favor, and the motivational pathway, what the agent actually responded to. 6. The key takeaway. Motivating reasons are essential for evaluating judgment because they reveal the agent's reasoning process, not just the correctness of the outcome. They show, what the agent took to be relevant, how they interpreted their situation, whether they exercised rational capacities, and whether their judgment expresses responsible agency. Normative reasons tell us what should have guided the judgment. Motivating reasons tell us what did guide it, and therefore how to evaluate the agent. Below is a risk assessment framework that weaves together, the agent who is about to agree to risks and harms, the appraiser who evaluates the judgment, the role of motivating versus normative reasons, and the distinction between right and wrong actions. Risk assessment framework, motivating reasons, appraisal, and right-wrong action. 1. The scenario. We are evaluating a situation in which, an agent is about to agree to take on certain risks or harms. An appraiser, observer, evaluator, moral judge, must assess whether the agent's judgment is sound, responsible, and morally appropriate. This requires distinguishing, normative reasons, the facts that genuinely count for or against accepting the risk, motivating reasons, the psychological considerations the agent actually responds to, right versus wrong actions, the moral status of accepting or imposing the risk. 2. The core structure of the assessment. A. The agent's position. Should I agree to this risk? The agent faces 3 layers of evaluation. 1. Normative risk profile, external. These are the objective considerations, magnitude of harm, probability of harm, reversibility, alternatives, duties to self or others, foreseeable consequences. These are the justifying reasons, the reasons that should guide the agent. 2. Motivational pathway, internal. These are the actual psychological drivers behind the agent's decision. Fear, desire for approval, misunderstanding, wishful thinking, pressure, personal values, emotional salience. These are the motivating reasons, the reasons that do guide the agent. 3. Judgment formation. The agent's judgment is evaluated by asking, did the agent's motivating reasons track the normative reasons? Did the agent weigh the risks responsibly? Did the agent understand the nature and magnitude of the harms? Did the agent exercise rational agency? This determines whether the agent's judgment is competent, negligent, biased, or rational. 3. The appraiser's position. Was the judgment good, responsible, or morally appropriate? The appraiser evaluates the agent on two axes. A rational appraisal. The appraiser examines, whether the agent's motivating reasons were relevant, whether the agent ignored obvious evidence, whether the agent's reasoning was distorted by bias or pressure, whether the agent's decision-making process was competent. This is an evaluation of judgment quality, not just outcome. B. Moral appraisal. The appraiser also evaluates, whether agreeing to the risk is morally permissible, whether the agent is being exploited or coerced, whether the agent has duties to others that constrain their choice, whether the action aligns with right versus wrong conduct. This is an evaluation of moral status, not just rationality. 4. How motivating reasons shape the appraiser's evaluation. Motivating reasons matter because they reveal why the agent judged as they did. A. If the agent's motivating reasons align with normative reasons, the judgment is rational, the agent is responsible, the action is more likely to be morally appropriate. B. If the agent's motivating reasons diverge from normative reasons, the judgment may be irrational or negligent, the agent may fail to appreciate the risk, the action may be morally wrong even if the outcome is harmless. C. If the agent's motivating reasons are distorted. For example, fear, pressure, misunderstanding, the appraiser may judge the agent as not fully responsible. The moral burden may shift to whoever imposed or encouraged the risk. The action may be wrong because the agent's consent is compromised. 5. Interlacing right-wrong action with risk and motivation. The moral status of the action depends on three intersections. 1. Right-wrong of the action itself. Is agreeing to the risk permissible? Does it violate duties to self or others? Does it impose unjustified harm? 2. Right-wrong of the motivating reasons. Are the agent's reasons virtuous, care, responsibility, or vicious, recklessness, vanity? Are they responding to the right kind of considerations? 3. Right-wrong of the appraiser's evaluation. Is the appraiser fair? Are they holding the agent to appropriate standards? Are they sensitive to context, capacity, and pressure? 6. The final synthesis. A full risk assessment requires integrating, normative reasons, what counts in favor or against the risk, motivating reasons, what the agent actually responds to, judgment quality, how the agent reasons, moral evaluation, right versus wrong action, appraiser's role, how we evaluate the agent's reasoning and responsibility. Motivating reasons are the bridge between, the agent's internal psychology, the normative landscape of risks and harms, and the appraiser's evaluation of right and wrong. They reveal whether the agent's judgment expresses, rational agency, compromised consent, negligence, or moral virtue. Abortion, the experiencer-appraiser gap, and moral salience in virtue ethical evaluation. Disagreements about abortion often hinge on a deep structural asymmetry between the experiencer, the pregnant individual who directly undergoes the physical, psychological, and social consequences, and the appraiser, who evaluates the moral status of the decision from a distance. This asymmetry creates what can be called an experiencer-appraiser gap in moral salience. The features of the situation that are most vivid, urgent, and morally weighty for the experiencer may not be equally salient to the external evaluator. The experiencer confronts embodied risk, temporal pressure, medical uncertainty, and personal vulnerability. The appraiser, by contrast, typically engages the question through abstract principles, general moral rules, or idealized models of agency. This divergence in vantage points can produce radically different assessments of the same action. From the standpoint of motivating reasons, the experiencer's judgment is shaped by immediate realities, bodily autonomy, health risks, economic constraints, relational pressures, and the lived texture of pregnancy. These reasons are psychologically operative and morally significant because they reflect the agent's actual confrontation with harm, risk, and responsibility. The appraiser, however, often privileges normative reasons that are external to the agent's lived experience, such as the moral status of the fetus, the value of potential life, or general principles about duties and rights. The gap emerges when the appraiser treats their own normative reasons as morally decisive while discounting or misinterpreting the motivating reasons that structure the experiencer's judgment. This can lead to moral evaluations that fail to track the agent's actual reasoning, capacities, or constraints. Virtue ethics provides a powerful lens for understanding this gap. In Aristotelian terms, virtue is a mean relative to us, not a fixed midpoint, but a calibrated response that fits the agent's circumstances, capacities, and knowledge. The experiencer's judgment about abortion is therefore evaluated, not by whether it conforms to an abstract rule, but by whether it expresses practical wisdom, phronesis. The ability to discern what is appropriate given the particulars of the situation. The appraiser, lacking the experiencer's embodied perspective, may misjudge the mean by applying standards that ignore the agent's context. Virtue ethics thus warns against moral assessments that treat the agent's situation as interchangeable with an idealized or generalized case. The moral salience of pregnancy is not evenly distributed. It is weighted toward the experiencer, whose practical reasoning is shaped by privileged access to the relevant facts. Objectivist virtue theory, understood here as the virtue of correct design or proper functioning of one's rational capacities, reinforces this point. A virtuous agent is one who reasons correctly with what they have access to in the given moment. The experiencer possesses privileged knowledge of their own body, risks, values, and constraints. Their judgment is formed within a domain of information that the appraiser cannot fully inhabit. The principle of privileged knowledge, therefore, becomes morally significant. The agent's epistemic position is not merely different, but normatively relevant. A correct moral evaluation must respect the asymmetry of access. When an appraiser ignores this asymmetry, they risk imposing a standard that the agent could not rationally meet, thereby misclassifying a contextually wise decision as morally deficient. In this light, the experiencer-appraiser gap is not a flaw in moral reasoning, but a structural feature of moral life. Virtue ethics and objectivist rational design both emphasize that moral judgment must be indexed to the agent's situation, not abstracted away from it. The experiencer's motivating reasons, rooted in privileged knowledge, are not epistemic noise but essential components of responsible agency. The appraiser's task, then, is not to override the agent's perspective with external principles, but to evaluate whether the agent's judgment expresses the virtues appropriate to their circumstances. Practical wisdom, self-care, courage, and responsible attention to risk. When this framework is applied, the moral salience of abortion decisions becomes clearer. The agent's lived perspective is not merely one input among many, but a central axis of moral evaluation. Below is a clear, structured Readaphrides section explaining moral salience within a Waiter-Frieson's framework. It integrates seamlessly with the rest of your document and uses the same conceptual architecture you've been building. Moral salience and the weight of reasons. Moral salience refers to the features of a situation that stand out as morally important to an agent. In a Waiter-Frieson's framework, moral salience determines which reasons the agent notices, prioritizes, and treats as decisive. Two agents may face the same objective facts, yet the moral landscape appears differently to each because different features become salient. This is not merely a psychological variation. It is a structural component of how moral judgment is formed and evaluated. In any decision involving risk, harm, or moral conflict, the agent confronts a field of competing considerations. Some reasons count strongly in favor of an action, others count against it, and many are weak or peripheral. The weight of a reason is its normative force, how much it should matter. But the salience of a reason is how much it actually matters to the agent in the moment of judgment. A reason can be normatively weighty, yet psychologically dim, or psychologically vivid yet normatively weak. This divergence is central to understanding both rationality and moral responsibility. Moral salience shapes the motivating reasons that guide the agent's judgment. When a reason becomes salient, it enters the agent's deliberative field with heightened force. For example, a risk that is personally embodied or emotionally charged may become disproportionately salient, while a distant or abstract harm may fade into the background. Conversely, an agent trained in a particular virtue, such as justice, compassion, or prudence, may be attuned to features that others overlook. Salience thus acts as a filter, determining which reasons the agent treats as action-guiding. From the appraiser's perspective, evaluating judgment requires distinguishing between the objective weight of reasons and the subjective salience of reasons. A judgment may be flawed not because the agent lacked access to the right reasons, but because their salience map was distorted by fear, bias, pressure, inexperience, or limited knowledge. Conversely, a judgment may be exemplary because the agent's salience map accurately tracked the normative landscape, allowing them to respond to the right considerations in the right measure. This is why moral evaluation cannot be reduced to outcomes alone. It must examine how the agent's attention, perception, and reasoning were structured. Virtue ethics provides a natural home for this analysis. Practical wisdom, phronesis, is the capacity to perceive what is morally salient in a situation. The virtuous agent does not merely know the rules, they see the morally relevant features with clarity and proportion. Their salience map is calibrated to the normative structure of the world. In contrast, vice often manifests as a failure of salience. The coward exaggerates danger, the rash person ignores it, the selfish person overlooks others' needs, and the cruel person finds suffering insignificant. Virtue is therefore partly a matter of correct moral attention, the ability to let the right reasons become salient, and to assign them their proper weight. In a Waiter-Frieson's model, moral salience is the bridge between normative reasons and motivating reasons. It determines which reasons the agent actually responds to, how they balance competing considerations, and whether their judgment expresses rational agency or a breakdown in deliberation. When moral salience aligns with normative weight, the agent's judgment is both rational and virtuous. When it diverges, the appraiser must determine whether the divergence reflects excusable limitations, understandable context, or culpable distortion. This makes moral salience a central component of evaluating judgment, responsibility, and the moral quality of action. A complete evaluation of risk-taking cannot stop at outcomes or surface-level reasoning. It must trace the path from the normative landscape of risks and harms, through the agent's motivating reasons, to the appraiser's moral and rational assessment. This layered approach reveals whether the agent's judgment is grounded, distorted, pressured, negligent, or genuinely rational. It also clarifies when an action is morally permissible, when consent is compromised, and when responsibility shifts from the agent to those who shape or exploit their motivations. By distinguishing what should guide a decision from what actually guides it, we gain a clearer view of the agent's agency and the moral status of the action. This framework ensures that risk assessment is not merely technical, but deeply attuned to the realities of human reasoning, the demands of responsible judgment, and the ethical boundaries that separate right from wrong.